were held hostage.
Okay,
No, I'm quiet.
Dio Imanya, Dio Wialua, Dio Udio, Dio Shubile, Dio Shamile, Dio Wialua, Dio Ensi, Dio Udio, Dio Udio, Basolomoni, 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 Baye isosha lomkhonto wesizwe elabola awamabhunu eAfrika baye isosha lomkhonto wesizwe elabola awamabhunu eAfrika hangane kancane moye hangane kancane khalaphi awusija hangane kancane Kale moye hangane kancane khalaphi awusija oyajabula for my body oyajabula for my body awusija oyajabula for my body oyajabula for my body awusija hangane kancane kale moye hangane kancane khalaphi awusija hangane kancane kale moye hangane kancane khalaphi awusija Yamemezenze Atume mahlebe Yolehla ngesomfa Yole bangusatha Yamemezenze Atume mahlebe Yolehla ngesomfa Yole bangusatha Yamemezenze Atume mahlebe Yolehla ngesomfa Yole bangusatha How
Good afternoon, comrades. Good afternoon to those that have managed to log in so far. My name is Comrade Sarah Mukwebo, and I'll be the facilitator for today's dialogue. I am just going to give ourselves 1 more minute so that we start at exactly 12:10 with our dialogue, and then we'll take it from there. Good afternoon once again, comrades. I am back, and as I've introduced myself, my name is Comrade Sarah Mukwebo, and I am part of the OR Tambo School of Leadership, and I'll be the facilitator for this afternoon's dialogue. So this afternoon dialogue is on representativity and inclusivity, and we're going to be having this discussion in the context of race, gender, youth, as well as about members of the LGBTQIA+ community. So I was reading up about this particular topic, and maybe before I proceed, I must also just render an apology that Comrade JP is won't be able, in as much as he's logged in right now, he won't be with us until the end of the session. That is that on my side with regards to just an apology that I needed to note. So before I even try to introduce the topic, so we have three people that are going to be speaking today. It's Comrade Patsy, who is the convener of the ANC Women's League LGBTQIA+ desk, and she's from the Northern Cape. We have Comrade Asanda, who's the coordinator of the Youth League in the Western Cape and also the chair of the NYDA. And we also have Cde Makoma Makhurupetje, one of my favorite people. She is a PC member of the ANC in Limpopo, and she's also one of the facilitators of the OR Tambo School of Leadership. And she also is the entity of the Women's League as well. So today's topic, as many of you may be aware, it's about representativity and inclusivity. And these are hot topics that have just been doing the rounds for the longest kind of time, because in as much as we might be a country that is said to be democratic, or that we say we are a democratic country, we also need to look at the quality of our democracy, because democracy doesn't begin and end with us just being able to vote, or us being able to associate politically, or us being a people that are just able to have our opinion is enshrined in the Constitution, because we are allowed to voice our views, we are allowed the right of association, and all sorts of things. So today's conversation will then speak on, or even further unpack, more especially in the context of our democracy, what the quality that it is and improvements that can be made, because it's one thing to allow people to be able to vote. It's another thing whether or not the interests of those people are actually promoted or are prioritized and all those kinds of things, considering more especially when it comes to issues of women, and more especially issues of the LGBTQIA+ community, because our world, our societal order is still quite, it still operates in what people call binaries. You know, it's literally always black and white. There's no room to recognize the fact that there are gray areas that might exist, you know. And in many instances, when policies are come up with, whether it's policies or it's programs or whatever it is, it's often viewed in a lens that thinks that the world is only set to accommodate men. It's not, and the men that are actually said to be accommodated by the world are white men. You know, our society or the world order or the world in itself is not designed for I don't want to say occupation, but it's not designed for everyone else who does not identify as a white, straight male. So today's conversation is going to just focus on what it means when you talk about representativity, what it means when you talk about inclusivity, and how does that shape or inform the world as we know it, the world as you experience it, and all sorts of things. One of the many things that, or the one time I got introduced in particular to this topic of inclusivity and representation was during FISMA's fall. And this is something I'm just going to narrate about at a later stage. So I'm going to start with Comrade Patsy, because Comrade Patsy is unfortunately going to be leaving us so she's going to be with us for 30 minutes. So she's the person that I'm going to have to start with. And then after that, we're going to have Comrade Asanda. And then after Comrade Asanda, it's going to be Comrade Makoma Makhurupetje. And then after Comrade Makoma, then we're going to Q&A. I will also read your comments as well in the chat box. It's very interactive. So this is also in our quest or to be inclusive, that if you feel that you're not going to be able to speak, or you are shy, or for whatever reason, you can then deposit your question or your comment or anything via the chat box, and I'm going to read it out for everyone. So I'm going to start by introducing Comrade Patsy. Comrade Patsy is a human rights activist and is a
Comrade Sarah.
Yes, Comrade Makoma.
Sorry for interjection.
Yes.
Can we request those that are allowing people to come in to make sure that it doesn't make noise, because as and when you speak, it says twitty, and
It
as and
actually
when you
does for
speak.
all of us because we are co-hosts. So the reason we can hear it when people are supposed to enter is because we are
Oh,
co-hosts.
okay.
So
Oh,
it can
okay.
be fixed. It was supposed to have been fixed before we started
Oh,
with the
sorry.
meeting. So now we can't
Alright.
fix it anymore. So we have
No,
to
it's
pretend
okay.
like we
Oh.
can't hear it.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so you have to master you have to master the skill of sort of like ignoring those tones. So as I was saying, Cde Patsy P Alley is a human rights activist, a board member of the Gender Dynamics, also is a spokesperson for the MEC of Transport Safety and Liaison in the Northern Cape. And as I had mentioned that Cde Patsy is the national convener of the ANC Women's League LGBTQIA+ desk, as well as an entity member of the ANC Women's League. Cde Patsy also holds a Bachelor of Social Sciences in Psychology that they obtained from University of Cape Town. Cde Patsy, you can come in.
I have not unmuted myself. Good day, comrades. Yes, my name is Patsy. I'm a trans woman. I'm addressed by the pronouns she and her. I'm actually now at the Gender Dynamics office where we're having a board meeting, and I've just requested to be excused for this. It is such a great pleasure and honor. By the way, Comrade Sarah, I've in preparation for today, I've done a lot of reading and I've used a lot of your material and the material of our Istanbul School of Leadership, but with the intention of course, linking it and making it speak to our realities. It is such a pleasure to be here. It's a bit daunting because I'm here together with a lot of thought leaders, and I'm more a feeling leader. But it is great to be here to share and be in conversation with you. I'm so sorry that I cannot be here for the remainder or for the rest of the session, because it would have been great. I'm just asking also from Sarah that we collect all the inputs that we have received so that we can use this moving forward. Yeah, and actually I would like to start with an experience that I've had a few years ago, 15, 16 years ago. When I was involved with programs and activities of the Women's League, and as a trans identifying woman, and I was working and as a volunteer, and I wanted to join the Women's League, and the leadership at the time, I'm from a very small town in the Northern Cape. The leadership at the time did not understand, what do you mean? Do you want to become a member? I said, no, give me the membership form. I want to complete it. And they're like, why? Because this is the Women's League. And I'm like, I'm a woman. I'm a trans woman. And they're like, no, we hear what you say. But in effect, it was like there was no acknowledgement of trans womanhood as a woman at the time. So I must say that we have moved from that to where we are today. If we talk about history, it would be neglectful and dismissive if we sort of assume that we've not had queer people that were actively involved in the struggle for liberation even, or present in branches nationwide as we are now. We may have notable examples, for example, that are documented, like your Comrade Simon and Cordy's and Dr. Baptiste, who's still busy and a staunch fighter for human rights today. At this point, in many history narrations in the country and even in the movement, there is kind of an erasure and a void in recounting how queer people have shaped and driven the liberation cause and even movement building today. So even today, how we are involved in several different capacities on different political and other platforms to drive a strengthening of our position within the movement and society, as well as our fundamental goal, which I believe is to ensure all aspects that has to do with bettering the lives of queer people, that they find expression not only in policy spaces, but with regards to real issues like access to service delivery. We also want jobs, we want access to healthcare, we want housing. And the protections that we fight for, the protections that we must enjoy as citizens of our constitutional democracy, of our country. There's a lot of engagement around the national question, the national identity and how it must be understood. For me, I think it needs to include an understanding of present-day South Africa, and one can say not just South Africa, the world. And that's whether the ANC as a leader of society is capacitated to enable all our diverse expressions in all of the levels of diversity that we have, all our lived realities and identities, and the capturing and reaching of our individual and collective ideals, and thus how even diversity can be translated into either forces that are divisive or generate a commitment to move from the reality of difference as divisiveness and difference as something to be celebrated and even promoted. As diverse as we are, and even with efforts at characterizing or conceptualizing something like a national identity, it seems to be difficult to move from our experience of each other as other and us. It's us and them situation, to a place where we are enlivening our differences as a beautiful source of perspectives that can help us to address our specific and varied and changing societal needs and aspirations in a modern day South Africa, for example. We have welcomed the transition from apartheid with joy. We have queer people and with much enthusiasm. We know and understand the importance of nation building, of inclusion, of equality. But there's the realization that there's a disconnect, that much of this has not been achieved or has not transpired. And this is a very apparent in the standing and the standing inequalities in our society and the disparities between those who have and those who do not have, those who know and those who do not know, those who have access and those who are still suffering, those with power and those indeed who are still ignored. The issue of underdevelopment, poverty, inequality, and even access to basic services emanates from historical and socioeconomic racialism, which we understand, but we do need to also understand that interwoven with this is the fact that Black queer bodies, Black queer people have suffered these as well, as in addition societal, attitudinal, actual, physical, and structural prejudices and oppression by virtue of their sexual orientation and gender identity. These are compound forces that shape the lack of representation of the queer agenda, as well as, in fact, queer people themselves in positions of both power and authority and representation. For instance, in the South African Constitution, as the key guard of the country advocates for a non-racial South Africa, at the same vein, the Constitution and policies of the ANC as a governing political party is also proclaiming a South Africa that is advancing nation building and social cohesion, stepping up the fight against, and there's this range, and we are selective about this range. Again, the fight against racism, sexism, homophobia, and other intolerances. It is being said that even though the demon of racism, for example, is far from defeated, we have a society that refuses to accept racism as the norm. So even though there's still racism, we as a society have agreed that we do not like the thing and we want it gone. So as we stand, can we say the same, for example, for things like homophobia and transphobia? Because even though we also need to fight discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, it still happens. But are we saying as a nation that really is something that we don't want and we don't need? Are we saying that as a movement? So even though we have adopted and and have it as source of fire in our liberation struggle to include this thing of non-discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, where does the society that in principle rejects homophobia and transphobia and the resulting oppression that lives itself out in our inability to collect our attitudinal and even, you can say, our moral political thrust behind reaching safe spaces, inclusive spaces, where we don't just include, but we actively advocate for and push for levels of inclusion and representation in real terms, not as in tokenistic terms. Though South Africa is a democratic society since 1994, the country still faces major challenges of nation building and the establishment of the common identity based on South African nationalism and shared patriotism. These challenges have proved to be difficult to overcome precisely because they are rooted and deeply rooted and interwoven in our South African society. The queer community, no doubt, were fighting and cheering just as much as anyone else when we reached 1994. We collected ourselves and readied ourselves with dreamy eyes and full of hope and expectation for us to be seen and heard and have a place at the table, right? A dream that has also faded over time as the reality of our divisions is running very deep. Then our initial thrust behind all these things to attain equality in all aspects. Comrade Sarah, I came across your article that asked why is nationalist ideology depicted as though men and women have different goals and agendas for the nation? Why is nationalism portrayed as patriotic manhood when a man that is, as the patriotic manhood and it's started in that way? While the role of women is romanticized, motherhood, you put it so well, and it's such an indication of how we see the gender struggles of people and how it's perceived. Why should the liberation of these two genders be unequal and different? What this means for us is that we have different conceptions of roles within our society, and this plays itself out in awkward and in fact regressive ways, according to myself. I know that at branch level we have queer comrades who are active and moving and fighting, but mostly we are relegated to bring just vibe and energy and color. Mostly we are used to write things for other people, to come in and decorate the hall with tablecloths that are green and black and yellow, bring in the flowers, make soup for the volunteers, or fetch things for people. And now I'm going to, because there's no point in talking about theory and theoretical spaces when we don't talk about the actual realities at branch level and at community level. Some of us have, even in our branches, moved to play central part in the logistics and the operations of our branches and in branch building, as well as driving strategy, but without enjoying necessarily the recognition and value and effect of what we are contributing. Sometime when we, for example, at branch level and coming through the ranks, when we need to decide on who and what talent we're going to nominate, the exact same trans woman, for example, who has kept together the branch operations and has been key to election campaigns over time, is not even considered. So there's a mental block. I don't even want to call it a mental block. There's a block that is thicker and harder than the glass ceiling of, I think, in the 60s and 70s, women had this thing called, referred to as the glass ceiling. It's like we exist only in our usefulness as support mechanisms to leadership and branches, rather than as budding leadership in our own right. I want to read this bit also from one of the articles, because it's also so pertinent to the discussion today, nationalism as a form of identification and system of representation is constituted as gendered discourse right from its beginning or its inception. Its construction occurs in an already gendered society. As such, these already socially constructed ideas of femininity and masculinity shape the participation of females and males, or women and men, in the building of nations and states, and that has bearing also on the LGBTI community, as we are dealing not only with sexual orientation, and then, the expectations that we have as a society of masculinity and femininity and how it plays itself out, and the roles that we are given and afforded within the movement. So it's not only just about men and women, but also about gender identity and the relegation that we are receiving in political spaces anywhere or everywhere. That extends also to how the roles of these mentioned genders are, how are we viewing the role of men and the role of women in our movement. The focus of nationalism on primarily men and women genders also disregards the existence of other genders and sexualities who partake in the struggle for freedom, because we've been there and we are still here. And that's also how the expression of anything different is difficult to digest, deal with, and positively process into value, which I agree with so much, because when matters of LGBTQI and LGBTI representation comes up.
Excuse me, Patsy.
Okay, Sarah.
There are a few comrades in the chat that are saying that they can't hear you properly. I don't know what could be the issue.
Okay, am I more audible right now?
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to try and just go louder. So when we look at women in leadership and what are their positionings and their roles and how their authority and input is defined along lines of expectation and expertise, even holding similar positions as men in certain spaces, if you look at hierarchies and so forth, how much weight really is afforded the positioning of women, and are we to remain supporting rather than spearheading change and impact? And this also goes for the LGBTI community. Are we going to be relegated the whole time in support functions rather than being developed and developing ourselves into leadership in our own right? I wanna just throw something out there that may be controversial at this point from my Sarah and comrades on the platform. For example, let me muddy the water and talk about gendered expectations in the movement, and even how we as women become reflections of societal norms and expectations, and maybe even sometimes conduits of patriarchy in our spaces where we are intended to fight in the transformation of society. Something as simple as you could look at our uniform of the Women's League and our insistence how, it is supposed to be. The Women's League uniform has a beautiful history and a beautiful significance, but when we think about the fact that we need it to be a skirt, we need it to be a black skirt as the defining characteristic that represents and reinforces the notion of womanhood in opposition to manhood. I mean, I love skirts. I don't love skirts because I'm a woman, but I think I look cute in skirts. But not all women like skirts. Some women will never like skirts, and it makes it uncomfortable, for example, to identify with the notion of skirts if you have to wear them in order to be a blouse member of the Women's League, for example. This is something I'm just entering as something that we can think about. We must also look at not just the LGBTI community, but women, how we are engaged, how we are prioritized, how we are remembered in spaces. On what terms are we included in branch activities? On what level are we consulted about programs and submissions on how to effectively mobilize as a movement? Are we only included as members to the gender desk? You know, people like to put us in the gender desk. It's a lovely space to be at, but it's not the only thing that we could do. We have such valuable input that we can give in spaces like where we talk about safety, about infrastructure development, about the economy, about governance. How are we acknowledged for the roles that we play and the capacities we so richly have that build the movement as we speak? To what extent are we merely endured at this point rather than celebrated, directed, supported, and elevated? These are questions that I don't have an answer for, but that I'm submitting because these are things that we need to think about in movement building. Even in the political spaces that we have and that we are functioning in, are there certain behavioral expectations of us, just as we expect, or some may expect women to behave in leadership in a specific way? Is it the same for the LGBTI community? Must we be there but quiet in the corner and just be breathing tokens of representation? And if we do not conform to behavioral standards and we demand justice and inclusion and equality, how are we dealt with? If we are bold and audacious and articulate and capable, how does it disturb the sensibilities of others and of leadership in the space and how they thought we were supposed to be? So, you know, when you talk about nationalism and so on, you talk about a collective will, which is a wonderful concept. But we should also note that the LGBTQIA+ community, there is no really such one collective will. Even inside, we are as diverse across these letterings, making us up then the things we think that separate us from the rest of society. Even aspects such as class, gender, ethnicity, regional, generational differences, it plays itself out even within our ranks. The complexities within our community, as well as the complex structure of our South African society, may create fear of, you know, will we ever be able to rally behind what we call a singular national identity? For me, it isn't so. I find inspiration, vision, and enthusiasm because of these differences and diversities that are so special and peculiar to our South African society. Almost done, Comrade Sarah. We can reach a moment where difference, the exact fact of difference and diversity becomes our thing, that special thing that should promote a move towards a society where we live as people and not just mere demographic indicators. You know, when we talk renewal, we not only talk about the machinery of the ANC as an organization and how it functions, how it does things, and what it wishes to achieve, but it must also speak to what South Africa looks like today, what new ways of engagement speaks to the youth, and how do we stay relevant? How do we appeal to our dwindling electoral support base, for example? Why is it that we are not realizing that queer people of age can vote and we can significantly bolster regional, provincial, and national election outcomes, as well as considerably affect branch processes when we are included, welcomed, and respected in these spaces? Why are we failing to realize that branches and structures in the leadership must reflect societal realities and must staunchly address and condemn any and all oppressive and discriminatory practices? So everywhere and everyone in the movement must understand the dynamics of our changing society and be committed to taking practical steps in the daily life to push the frontiers of fundamental transformation. You know, they say the ANC must urgently develop a program to broaden its base to non-traditional base. And I just want to say, you know, we're not a non-traditional base, we've been there. We are only non-traditional in as much as you know, in the narratives and the written narratives in the ANC, we have elected to erase our presence and our efforts in these spaces. So what is queer inclusion? What does it mean? What does it look like for us? These are the questions that we need to engage on from a branch level, from local level, upwards, because we cannot just ask for inclusion and representation and not understand what it means for us as queer people and for us as queer people in the movement. What does it look like for us? What is representation? What does that look like? How is it achieved? How is it? What is the impetus behind it, and how do we activate it? What are the things that might
I think we might have lost Comrade Patsy there. On my side, she appears as though she's frozen. Comrade Patsy? Comrade Patsy? Okay, it would seem either I'm having a connection problem or Comrade Patsy is having a connection problem. Can you, comrades, hear me?
Yes, Comrade Sarah, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, no, I suspect that we lost Comrade Patsy, yeah, because she's now also disappeared from the screen. That also happened at the time when I was actually going to ask her to wrap up, because time is no longer on our side. Comrade Patsy spoke on a number of points, you know, from strengthening the position of queer or LGBTQIA plus people in our society and in our organization, to the issue of the national question, as well as how women and queer people are engaged when it comes to issues that relate to our democracy. You know, can be policy, can be budgeting, for instance. It can literally be anything. And one of the things that stood out for me, and which is a conversation that I think needs to be developed even further, it's on the issue of the national question, which is one of the biggest thing that the ANC constantly wants to contend with, because as the principal of the OR Tambo School, Comrade David Masondo, would say that the national question is what determines who then belongs, you know, and when it has been established, who is it that we say belongs to form part of a particular nation, it then informs the quality of life that person is going to live, you know, whether it's being afforded services by the government, or it's been allowed opportunities, whether for economic or social or cultural interests and all those kinds of things. I am going to ask Comrade Asanda to now come in, or to just get ready to come in as I introduced her. Comrade Asanda, as I had said, she is the coordinator of the ANC Youth League in the Western Cape. And she also is the chair of the NYDA, which is also known as the National Youth Developing Agency. And she's also been with the Mapungubwe Institute as a researcher, if I'm not mistaken, at the time. She's also worked for Parliament as well. And one of her, or some of her achievements include being one of the winners where she had to go represent South Africa in an educational trip to the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. She also was a finalist for the Muremi Initiative for Women's Leadership in Africa in 2015 as one of the fellows. Comrade Asanda, you can come in.
Thank you, Comrade Sarah. I'd like to believe that I am audible.
Yes, you are.
All right. No, thank you, comrades, and good afternoon to the comrades on this platform. I must also just extend an appreciation to the OR Tambo School of Leadership for facilitating such a discussion. I was quite excited when I was sent this particular topic and asked to speak on it. So without really wasting any or much time, I'll really just present my input, which is titled, Youth as a motive force for growing South Africa and deepening democratic participation. Now, for me, what's important, and really just to contextualize this discussion, is around what is it that is expected from us by the ANC. And for this, we really come to a realization that, the ANC expects from us that we would have developed consciousness, right? But a particular form of consciousness, scientific, dialectical rather, and which is derived from the ideology of the ANC, and that is of, progressive African nationalism, as well as, or rather that, and not, the social democracy or some other variant of ideology that we assume the ANC is representative of. Now, the ideology of progressive African nationalism weld together variants of different streams of ideological thought. However, it is not beholden to any one of them, right? So we have within this umbrella, or this broad church, so it is known, we have, your Marxism as a variant, your social democracy, your liberalism, your African socialism as variants, for instance, and they are all welded together to uniquely form what we describe as progressive African nationalism, and which distinguishes us from, your narrow nationalists whom we so often find in our surroundings. Now, we would have had the likes of your Cabral, your Nyerere, your Sankara, who have all expressed these views, but they themselves would have developed these views through study, reflection, self-cultivation, and praxis. So what then becomes paramount is for us to inquire as to whether among these variants, the ANC is able to adopt new forms of variants along its course of realizing this non-racial, non-sexist, democratic and prosperous South Africa, as well as ensuring that it continues to lead society during the evolving form and content of such a society. And lastly, I think for me, what becomes important is that we should be able to reflect as to whether the ANC is able to adequately respond to issues around intersecting oppressions, for instance. Now, we would have known that, the 53rd National Conference of the ANC would have declared the period of 10 years from 2013 to 2022, which is this year, as the decade of the Cde. And the ANC committed to implement a decade-long program of organizational renewal to safeguard the core values of the movement, as well as to build its transformative capacity as a strategic center of power, as well as a driver of fundamental change. Now, without going into depth as to what this particular conference would have resolved on, but just highlighting some of the key aspects would have been, particularly as it relates to political education, would be this idea of instilling, your political discipline, as well as institutionalizing political education and consciousness by expanding, the comprehensive political schooling system, which I think the OR Tambo School of Leadership would have been able to realize. Now, if we look at, what then becomes or ought to have been a strategy for this particular political education, what becomes important for me was to understand that, the complexity of your political, social, economic, as well as ecological challenges facing the ANC, as well as South Africa, impose a duty on all our members of the ANC to develop a coherent political education strategy. Now, all of this would have inculcated a dialectical relationship between the ruling party as well as government. And this dialectical relationship can be attributed to being at the core of organizations that subscribe to your Marxist-Leninist school of thought. Now, in this relationship, the party is the organized expression of the will of society. It leads the work of government, but remains distinct from government. Whereas, the ruling party sets the general policy direction as prescribed in conference resolutions and intra-organizational documents, which government ought to implement. Now, linked to this, the party is equally tasked with exercising enhanced oversight over government in general, And linked to the above would be a practical demonstration of how policy pronouncements, at the level of your intra-organizational processes have translated into government policy. Now, I raise this because what becomes important for us is to ensure that at the level of these intra-organizational processes, we are able to really reflect and make pronouncements that would then infuse into government what then becomes government programs in an effort to be as inclusive and as representative as possible. Now, linked to this would be this understanding that, one of the most striking features of the African polity in your pre-liberation struggle was the ability of youth formations to radically reshape the methods of struggle against your oppressive regimes. Now, a commonality with these liberation movements was the important and the historic role that young people particularly played, both in the processes of political and economic transformation under the liberation movement, as well as the processes that followed after political power was seized and state apparatus was occupied. Now, history cites many instances where young people would have played an active role. We would have found in Angola, for instance, you would have had the youth of the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, your AMPLA, for instance, which was founded in 1956, was seen as the hotbed of AMPLA's liberation movement of Angola at the time. But then equally in Namibia, your SWAPO, the Southwest Africa People's Organization, put out a number of publications in exile. And young people would have been part and parcel of such a movement and would have played an active role in that regard. But equally, you would have seen in the Eastern Front, in order to fight, your Portuguese, as well as for the liberation of Mozambique, Frelimo leaders wanted to foster the revolutionary potential of disgruntled Mozambican youth who had arrived from Tanzania, and equally they would have seen just how pivotal the youth voice would have played an instrumental role in that particular struggle. But also not too far off was, our own history, and you would have known, and without necessarily reciting the history of the formation of the Youth League, but would have seen that, what would have been growing tensions and mounting calls for a militancy and passive resistance against the oppressive apartheid would have been a response to this. A group of young people would have then founded the ANC Youth League, the likes of your Anton Limbete, your Ashby, Mda, and the likes. But I think in more recent history, and if you just particularly look at what has become the role of the ANC Youth League in particularly shaping the discourse as it relates to policy position, which would fundamentally feed into government programs. Now, the Youth League, for instance, has consistently called for, your social transformation in areas such as your education. Now, the ANC Youth League, for instance, has consistently called for the reduction of the financial burden on your poor students to pursue higher education. Now, at the 1998, which was the 20th National Conference, it called for increased funding for your National Student Financial Aid Scheme, or your NSFAS, through contributions from government, local, and foreign donors, as well as the private sector. Now, this call was echoed again at the 23rd National Conference, which was in 2008. Now, in short, the ANC Youth League saw affordable education as critical to the realization of the call for people's education for people's power. Now, the League thus supported the call for free education and to see its implementation further resolved to intensify the free education campaign. Now, it would have been the ANC Youth League that noted that young people face a complex conundrum. They cannot access employment opportunities because they lack the necessary skills as well as the necessary experience. But simultaneously, they face serious obstacles in accessing skills due to the high cost of your post-matric education, as well as they would have been able to identify various weaknesses in the further education and training field, as well as the workplace learning stream. Now, it was at this point that the Youth League made a clarion call for the decommodification of the education system, moving from the premise that education should be a right for all and not for the privileged few. Now, this view gained traction as it was asking for a more, or rather a move away from a class commodification of education, where those who could afford it given quality education, and those who could not afford received below standard education. Now, it would have obviously moved away from that to a more egalitarian approach where no young person would be denied their right to quality education, irrespective of their socioeconomic position in society. So what would then later become known as your Fees Must Fall movement across the country, where students as well as young people from institutions of higher learning embarked on mass protests calling for fee-free education, later became the foundation for which government would fast-track the process of legislating free and actually realizing free education. A momentous epoch in recent history of South Africa reaffirmed the ability of young people to reshape a society that would be characterized by a shared vision as well as collective goal. Now, this is one sighting of history, which is, I think we can agree that history is in fact riddled with similar demonstrations of how the voice of the youth has always been heard, and their vibrancy and militancy stance against not just your colonial rule, but the voice of young people continues to shape policy positions of the day. Now, to also further emphasize this particular point would be the understanding that, for us to be able to support a more holistic, integrated, as well as sustainable development of youth in South Africa, the government, since our democratic dispensation, has initiated and developed several legislation, policies, programs, and plans. Now, the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa of '96 entrenches the rights, the responsibilities, and principles which all South Africans must uphold. And it also lays the foundation for youth empowerment in particular. Now, over the years, youth development has taken the shape of mainstreaming as a theory of philosophy, and it therefore advanced as well as was integrated across a range of policies, such as your RDP of 1994, your Probation Services Act, your White Paper for Social Welfare, National Youth Commission, National Youth Policy, a range of instruments, your Youth Employment Accord, Employment Services Act, your National Youth Service, National Youth Service Framework, rather, of 2017, the MNE Monitoring and Evaluation Framework for the National Youth Policy, as well as the Integrated Youth Development Strategy. Now, here, what we begin to realize is that youth development also finds expression in the provincial and local spheres of government. The youth and development initiatives focus on 5 strategic areas: your health and well-being, education, skills, and second chance opportunities. They focus on economic participation and transformation, social cohesion and nation building, as well as building an effective, responsive youth development machinery. Now, whilst it can be argued that the ANC has made strides to ensure that it is inclusive of the youth strata, very little can be said about representation as well as inclusivity insofar as the LGBTQIA+ community. Now, you've got your feminist thought leaders such as your Collins, would have challenged society with a significant view of oppression and identity politics that not only has the possibility of changing the world, but also of opening up the prospects of continuous change. But the reality is that for continuous, or for change to be continuous, it can't be exclusively focused on one social group. So in other words, if we are to understand that there ought to be this continuous change, a social movement that is only concerned with racial inequality, but neglects a gendered as well as a class aspect of oppression would fail to appreciate the intersectional linkages between the three. So quite openly, the ANC describes this phenomenon as the interrelated but mutually exclusive contradictions of race, class, and gender. So whilst the ANC has written extensively about the dialectical relationship between the three, the application thereof on how to resolve this quagmire leaves much room for improvement. Now, we've got, within the ANC, the social transformation agenda, which seeks to transform the socioeconomic conditions of the people, protecting their well-being and livelihood through capacitating them to be able to take themselves out of poverty. Now, linked to this is the understanding that the social transformation programs thus seek to transform society by the provision of social infrastructure, your education, your health, human settlements, arts and culture, as well as the provision of a safety net for the most vulnerable in our society, being your children, elderly, people with disabilities, and quite arguably the LGBTQIA+ community. Now, the pillars of, the social transformation are based on building of a democratic as well as a developmental stage, which requires capacity as well as capability. Now, transforming the economy through the various instruments and various departments which have an impact on the economy, and as well as the orientation of the people around a common vision for an inclusive economy. Now, what this then brings us to is this idea that if we are to assume that that ought to be the position that we are, or the direction we are taking, then ideological work as well as the battle of ideas ought to form critical to the message of the ANC and the work developed by its members, which should entrench the hegemony of the ANC at all material times. Now, much more work should be done in building on the conceptual understanding of how the ANC ought to evolve to be this inclusive as well as a representative organization, while staying true to its character of progressive African nationalism. Now, through international work, members of the ANC can learn from global experiences to also influence the international community through advocating for solidarity, representation, and inclusivity, as well as, your socio-economic transformation for all. Now, how do we achieve all of the above would be having or getting to the point where mass mobilization as well as the organization then become pivotal elements of bringing about social transformation. In this regard, members of the ANC should be participatory and driven by the organization with the capability to drive programs at the level of government that will underscore the ideals of inclusivity and representation of all bodies who do not conform to the conventional binaries, as well as the gendered identities that were once described as one of the motive forces of the ANC. Now, it's my view then, it is only through such concerted efforts that the ANC will begin to move closer towards the full realization of inclusivity, of representation and representativity, and go beyond it just focusing on youth and women, but ensuring that the LGBTQIA+ group is able to find expression. Your individuals who don't conform to binaries, as Comrade Sarah spoke about earlier, will then become or feel that they are then included in the direction that the ANC is taking rather. So with those are just my parting shots, and I will then hand back over to Comrade Sarah. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you, Comrade Asanda. I had a connection challenge for a bit there, but I believe everyone can see and hear me. Thank you again, Comrade Asanda, for your contribution. I think you also did the discussion, especially with the context of youth, a great history about participation of youth, whether it's in liberation struggles or whether it's changing how society is and all those kinds of things. So that was a very good background that you provided. And you spoke about how intra-organization processes have influence on government programs and policies. And I want you, when you come back perhaps for the Q&A session, I would really just like to hear your thoughts on on how now it has become very visible that the youth is no longer too invested in partisan politics, because also sometimes people tend to confuse that with the youth not being politically active, but however, that is not true. And I think with your experience with the NYDA, you've actually seen a lot of youth formations that have come together, but aren't necessarily aligned to any political organization. And this then brings up the question of ideology and all sorts of things. What type of politics are they promoting? You know, how does then also then translate to the work that government or the state does? So I really would like to hear your point on how that kind of thing can be navigated in the instance where you still have young people organizing themselves, but they're no longer doing it according to party lines, but they still becoming people that organize themselves to influence what governments and states and even national, international rather, NGOs do. So we really would like to hear your thoughts on that. We now have Comrade Makoma, who's going to come in. Very CV, like it's very difficult to just read everything. But as I had said earlier on, Comrade Makoma is a PC member of the ANC. In League, she is one of the facilitators as well for the OR Tambo School of Leadership. We were facilitating together in Parliament the Gender and Women Emancipation module. And yeah, she's been in the ANC, I'm not trying to calculate, from 1991, she was a deputy branch secretary. So that's only 3 decades, which translates to 30 years. She's ANC, both the organization itself and also in instances where she's also been in provincial government in different capacities. And she's also pursuing her PhD. So soon, we're going to be calling her Dr. Makoma Makhurupetje. Comrade Makoma, you may come in.
Comrade Sarah, thank you very much.
Comrade Makoma?
Yes, Comrade Sarah, do you hear me?
I don't know if we need to call. Sipagazi, please just try calling
I hear
her.
you.
Okay. She seems to be, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much,
Yes,
Comrade Sarah. I
yes,
think where you are, your network, your network is troubling you a little bit. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate. Okay, thank you very much, Comrade Sarah, our facilitator, Comrade Sipagazi, and the team from OR Tambo School of Leadership, and speakers, Comrade Asanda and Comrade Patsy, for your presentations that you have already done. I want to apologize to the participants who are on the in the Zoom, because I wanted to not to use my video if they are comfortable with that, so that I don't tamper with my network. If I continue using on the video, I'm not sure if I will survive with my network. If my video is off, I really apologize for that. I'm now going to add on what other comrades have said. The main debate for today and the discussion, which we must appreciate OR Tambo School of Leadership for the that they're doing. Today's debate is on the representativity and inclusivity of issues of race, women, youth, and LGBTQIA+. This debate, it comes on when all of us were supposed to be saying, since 1994, or since historically when the ANC has been established, what was the purpose of the ANC's existence? When you trace back the ANC existence, you will realize that the ANC is existing for one specific reason and one measure objective. The reason for the ANC existence is to ensure that we build a national democratic society, which is united, non-sexist, democratic, non-racial, as well as a prosperous, which will build prosperous South Africa. Now, if the main objective of the ANC existence was that, why after 180 years or after 112 years of the existence of the ANC, we still debate representatives? Because its main objective was to ensure that the ANC is as inclusive as possible. Even though you will realize that when the ANC was established in 1912, women, for example, were not allowed to be members. And I want to start there because Comrade Patsy spoke a lot on LGBTQI representation, and Comrade Asanda spoke more on issues relating to the young people. I'll speak more on the role that we think women have played and women still play, and we think what contribution can they make to ensure that issues of representation, representativity, and inclusiveness, they can be able to make a contribution there. Like I've already said, that in terms of the history, when the ANC was established in 1912, women were not given an opportunity to participate. But then you can realize that women did not want to wait for anyone to tell them how to participate and what they must be able to do. That's why you are able to trace back the history of Bomme Charlotte Makhurupetje. Bomme Charlotte Makhurupetje, she was part of the meeting of the ANC. But then she did not say, because I'm not allowed to be a member, therefore I will fold my arms, complain. They went to form the organization that in 1913, where they were able to form their own organization, where all women were able to participate and be able to make sure that through the Bantu Women's League, they are able to participate. And that Bantu Women's League carried the Women's League until in 1943, when women were able to join as members, and until in 1948, when the Women's League was formally launched as a structure of the ANC Women's League. But you can see that the Women's League was not, the women were not just doing that work alone, because you can see that when they were allowed to join, that is when Comrade Mandela and them were brought in by the President Tuma at that time to be able to to join the ANC Youth League, which was very radical, which they made the Youth League to even launch earlier than the ANC Women's League. But the women continue to participate. We can trace their footsteps in 1956 when they were able to put their footprints. And you can as well see how the Freedom Charter is able to say all national groups shall have equal rights. So why now do we still talk about representativity at this point in time? When you read our strategy and tactics of 2017, it tells you that we must be able to say since 1912 or since the year of existence of resistance, because we are fighting for oppression, we are fighting for colonialism for a special time, we're fighting for patriarchy and all those kind of forms that were excluding people, that were deliberately excluding either in terms of race, because obviously apartheid, we're all part of fighting against apartheid because it was a basis for exclusion. So we must be able to say since 1994 to date, are we able to still say yes, we arrived somewhere, or no, we haven't arrived somewhere, we are still excluded completely. No, we are part of the processes now since 1994. That's why our strategy and tactics, when it looks at what have we done since 1994, it says we must ask ourselves a question that says, if we're fighting for colonialism for a special time, and we want to destroy it as the ANC, and in the form, the manner it was, and to ensure that people are able to participate without any hiccups, you can realize that so far, we can't say we have arrived there, because we still have challenges that we used to have, where even though people feel in terms of class, race, patriarchal relations of power, you still have people that think Bona, the white people that still are resisting, for example, in terms of racism, but even in terms of our society in South Africa. So South African society informs the African National Congress as an organization. It's still resisting. You can see how the issues of gender-based violence is coming up to say how many communities that are led by males are able to stand up and say a gender-based violence is an issue that is a societal matter. Because no matter how much the president can have summits, no matter how much we can have institutions that they can try to deal with that it's a societal problem. Because if I can give you, for example, to say if men are not able to stand up and say, not in our name, we will never arrive where we're going. It's only now that you get encouraged. When, for example, yesterday, you have seen Kinzwelitini leading a march against gender-based violence. If the leaders of society can stand up, all of them, join campaigns like that, then we can be able to see this kind of transformation, this kind of inclusivity, this kind of making sure that people are able to be represented at the right place. So the Women's League has tried its best, I must be able to say, because towards 1994, we'll know that the Women's League has been participating in the country, nationally, internationally, and in Africa as well. That's why even now, we still participate in an organization that we call POWER. POWER is an organization of African Union. That is the wing of the women where they participate. And all other countries in Africa, they rely on the African National Congress. They think the African National Congress, then the Women's League, can be able to help them deal with the challenges that many other countries in Africa are still experiencing as challenges. I say the Women's League has played its part because towards 1994, you remember that the Women's League was insisted that we want to be part of the negotiations. And our leaders at that time were part of those negotiations. And during the time of negotiations, when we were preparing for 1994, the Women's League stood up in the ANC and say, we want 30% representation when people go to parliament. And there was no document, there was nothing, but the Women's League says, sorry, comrades, do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Comrade Makoma.
We think the society that we're still in has not accepted to say their consciousness. I think the module that you are running, Comrade Sarah, the gender module, where the issue of raising the consciousness of saying, what is it that we mean is the role of this other society, the previously disadvantaged groups that have not been participating consciously. What does it mean? Because you still have women, as we feel like women still get unpaid, unequal pay, for example, in different job categories. Women still do more job than they are supposed to be doing. And it looks like nobody do not see anything. And I don't blame men for it. I blame women as well, because if I'm a female, I'm working, I've got a domestic worker or somebody who's working in my house, how do I treat that kind of a person? Because I must treat that person as a worker. I must pay that person equal pay in line with what the labor law says. But you still have those challenges that even us as women, we don't see it as our responsibility that as and when whatever work we do, we're supposed to embrace others and consciously say, what is it that I make as a contribution myself? Then in terms of that constitution, as I already said, we'll know that in government, yes, the constitution, now the Bill of Rights and other matters are being attended to. But we also fought for the Department of Women. Remember now in the presidency, we have got the department that's called Department of Women. And we don't think that department is playing the role it's supposed to be playing, because you have got Gender Commission. Does the Gender Commission play its role that like the Human Rights Commission, where they can be able to make people account? Then we think at national level, you have got that ministry, but in the provincial level, that unit is run by a director somewhere. In a municipality, you find that is a young person who's dealing with both youth and women and disability and children. And that young person, obviously, the mayor who's supposed to be responsible does not take full responsibility. So our view is, or my personal view that I'm putting it, as the ANC, we must discuss this matter of saying, why do we still have to debate the issue of representativity when the ANC is very, very clear in its constitution, in the manner they do things? But as the Women's League, we know that our role is not necessarily to be part of the ANC and fight for representation within the ANC. That's why we've been participating in the establishment of what we call Women Coalition, because we think other matters for us to achieve them, like I've said in the gender-based violence, you are supposed to find other organizations outside the ANC where we need to partner to say this matter. For example, the women of 1956, when they went to march, they called all women of different race. They not only called the Black women, all women of different race joined forces to fight the Dompas. So Tina, if we've got issues that are challenging us today, why don't we have joined forces with other women as a matter that affect the society? All of us who must be able to fight together. We have established a Women Coalition. We have established what we call South African Women in Dialogue. We have established what we call Progressive Women of South Africa. But unfortunately, you find that when these structures are taken over, that by people who don't understand the agenda, why these structures have been formed, at the end of the day, that they lose meaning, they lose, they no longer serve the purpose supposed to be serving. And the Women's League as well has said they've launched what we call the Young Women Desk. The intention of the Young Women Desk is to prepare young women to take over the Women's League, because we think this Women's League does not belong to the generation that is there for now. We think that the Women's League belongs to the future. And if it belongs to the future, that's why we have got a Young Women Desk, the Young Women Desk that must work with the old women. Then they can be able to learn and say, indeed, we are ready that we can be able to hand over the Women's League to the new generation, that they can be able to take the Women's League to the next level and to the next step. The Women's League has as well started what they call a Mashupatsila. This is something that we think the ANC must be able to support us. With the LGBTQI, there's the desk that Women's League has formed. The Women's League has formed it because we think we want them, we must embrace them. But we think the LGBTQI is not supposed to be a desk in the Women's League. It's supposed to be a desk in the ANC, because it's supposed to be a constitutional matter for them to participate fully in the ANC, to understand their role fully in the ANC. And as and when they come to the Women's League, they come like any other person. But we think this LGBTQI, we're taking that proposal to conference to say we must be able to make sure that the desk of LGBTQI, yes, the Women's League, we have embraced them, but we think the debate must say that structure must be able to be in the Women's League. Comrade Sarah and the people who are on the platform, the other matter which I want to raise, which I feel is a matter that must be debated. I spoke about the 50% representation, that in 1994, we had 30%. In 2007, we had 50%, which is in the Constitution. Where we sit, when we evaluate where we come from 2007 to date, we think we are regressing. We think we are regressing from the good work we have done in 1994. The reason we think we are regressing is because when you look at the women that are given an opportunity, let me start by women, because now we're fighting for youth to come in, we're fighting for other race to come in. Let me speak about women specifically. We think we're regressing because when the ANC in different structures, whether it's in a branch or is in a region, when they say we need mayors, it was a painful exercise when I was participating in the panel of appointing mayors. You find a structure like a PEC or an REC. They bring a very strong man, very weak women, who they know deliberately, those women will not make it for a mayor. And if they make it because we are pushing that a woman must be a mayor, they are setting them for a failure. So we're saying in the ANC, we cannot continue to accept a situation where women are only counted as numbers. We can't be counted as numbers because even during local government elections, when you insist that in a region or a province of 30 municipalities, we need 50% of females, 2 years down the line, all those females get recalled and they are replaced by males. And you see that the Women's League as a structure, even when they say they deploy females in different levels, whether in parliament, in whatever levels, in the boards of directors, when they deploy females, we feel there's a situation where you don't look amongst the best. And now we must be able to start fighting that. Why don't you look amongst the best? Because if you don't look amongst the best amongst us, you are setting us for a failure. But there are few smaller things that I must raise with females as well. We must stop to be jealous. We must stop competing against each other. If we must defeat this demon of patriarchy, we must start learning to work together, no matter how difficult the situation is. Because it's not going to be easy, but we must learn to support one another. We must learn to learn from each other, because indeed we have got different capacities. And when the females are majority in our own branches, it cannot continue as usual, that the Constitution 50% is only considered when you elect additional members. We must start seeing chairpersons of provinces of the ANC being females. That is where the Young Women Desk and the Youth League are coming in to join forces, because if they say amongst the leadership, let's look at the generational mix. It's indeed, you need the older generation, you need the generations that came, you need the generation that is young, so that you can be able to mix all the generations. They work together, they learn from each other, they gain skills, so that when the old generation exit the system, they're able to make us remain. But I fully agree with Asanda. Asanda, the skills revolution is the right way to go. There is no way we can transform the economy of this country if, as women, as young people, we are not taking keen interest on the skills that we get. Because we must challenge our education system to say, you can't be producing more than 1 million graduates annually, but you tell those graduates that we don't have space for you, you can't get work. Why can't we make sure that we retrain them, refocus them on what the economy wants? So those are the debates that says women must be able to say, the young people are right. If all of us, we can focus on the skills revolution, this country can go far. And indeed, in the next few years, we'll not be coming back and say, we still want a quota. We no longer want a situation that the ANC exists for us to be equally represented in all sectors, whether it's a sector of the economy, whether it's in the state, whether it's in the whatever areas where we're supposed to be represented. So as far as we're concerned, that's why the Women's League now says, when we go to the national conference, we are debating to say it can be that we come from that national conference in the top 6 to bring one female. When all of us, we exist for representation. And we support the young people to say, let's have a proper representation in all structures of the ANC, so that we send a proper message that even when we come back, we can be able to work together and make sure that the African National Congress, when any other person see this organization, read what is the goal and objective of its existence, read what the NDR stands for, they can be able to say, indeed, we're on the right journey to achieve the national democratic revolution that will bring the South Africa that is democratic, that is inclusive, all the race in terms of race, in terms of gender, and to ensure that all of us, this prosperity that we're talking about, and can be able to achieve. And indeed, the ANC will be there for the future of our own children, because all of us, we must build it for the future generations that comes. Comrade Sarah, let me stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Comrade Makoma. And thank you again to the comrades that are still with us this afternoon. Thank you, Comrade Makoma, for giving again a history of the ANC, and specifically also stating the fact that the ANC was founded in 1912, and in as much as it was founded in 1912, women were not allowed participation until 1943 or 44, if I'm not mistaken. But and not politically active, with your comrade Cde Patsy and also you painted this tendency of thinking that women don't belong in politics. It's only men that are found in politics. So it's only men that belong in politics, forgetting that there is a difference in people being politically active and them actually participating, and people serving in political organizations and them participating in politics in a much more formalized way compared to women who are often found in political spaces and participating in an informal way, whether it's in churches or it's in the communities that they belong to and all those kinds of things. You also spoke about the quota of the ANC. To say 94, it was 30%, 2007, it was 50%. It is a great stride. It really is a great stride. And the policy, the National Conference policy paper of the Women's League actually does speak on this thing as well. But the conversation needs to now go further. We will not belittle or ignore the strides that the ANC has made when it comes to especially the representation of women in leadership positions of the ANC. However, we need to now take this conversation further and exchange and not even exchange, but rather push back on this sort of like boundary of sorts that exists, where we then say, what is then the quality of the representation of women in the ANC? And every time I get to speak on this, I like mentioning some research Comrade Phoebe and I are working on looking at the representation of women in top 6 or top 5 positions or office bearers positions, the ANC. And the trend that we've noticed is that in as much as we'll once in a while have a historical thing where we have a woman who's a provincial secretary or a provincial chair or a regional secretary or regional chair, they're often not retained in that position for a long time. Or even if when they enter an office bearer's position, it's very difficult for them to have some sort of like upward mobility beyond that. It seems that being in the top 6 as a woman, either as a deputy secretary or as a treasurer, it becomes a cap for you. You come in as that, and then that's it. Nothing else happens to you. An example that I like giving with this, or something that we also picked up with Comrade Phoebe, was in the province of the Eastern Cape. When Comrade Oscar was provincial secretary, his deputy was Comrade Helen Sauls. Comrade Helen Sauls is still a deputy secretary even now, but Comrade Oscar is now provincial chairperson of the Eastern Cape. So this gets to show that in as much as we have this thing we call 50-50% in the ANC, but there still is no upward mobility of sorts for women in the ANC, and that is something that we need to change. and we need to change it in many ways. And you're also speaking about as well, you know, the skills of women and all those kinds of things. The issue of skills or the issue of capability or the issue of capacity is not an issue or a challenge that only affects women in the ANC. It affects everyone. We have a lot of malfunctioning municipalities in our country, which are led by men. And we need to have that conversation to say, how do we capacitate our comrades for them to ensure that our organization is strong, talking about men, women, and people in the LGBTQIA community that are serving in the ANC. I am now going to just read a few comments in the chat section, and then I'm going to note hands. So comrades, if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, you can raise hands now while I read through the comments, and then we'll take it from there. There was a time when I was disconnected, comrades. So I didn't lose the chats. I thought I would have lost the chats because there was a minute where I was disconnected. So there is a comment in the chat from Comrade Mujaki, where they say, let me echo and extend the question on youth involvement. Are we encouraging and motivating for youth participation and political consciousness for them to be partisan or to be patriotic? Where do we place ideological perspective in the youth development? So that is a question from Comrade Mujaki, which all of us can think about, but Comrade Asanda, I would appreciate if you may respond to it. There also is a comment from Comrade Luiselo Majolo, and they are saying that empowering young people is the right thing to do as a tool to build and develop our young people and prepare them for seriously managed shortage of skill in our society at large. There's another comment as well from Comrade Yolande, and Comrade Yolande is speaking on the issue of gender, or the issue of women rather, because there's a difference between gender and women, because sometimes those 2 points are often conflated, where they think when you talk about gender, we're talking about women only. And the problem is not the women. So it's not only women that we have to talk about. Comrade Yolanda says we need visionary leadership, men and women who will drive the mandate of the ANC. The ANC is the hope of Africa and Africans, where they found themselves oppressed in line with our vision enshrined in the Constitution. Therefore, hoping that this discussion will agitate us to reflect and be that change that we want to see where we find ourselves. To me, we should leave this platform having changed our minds and hearts as of today. We need a societal shift, and thanks to our Tambo School of Leadership for the platform. We need to be critical and honest as we advance the NDR in order to achieve an NDS that we envision. Women and children continue to bear the brand. Thank you, Principal Dr. Masonde and Comrade Sipogazi for the great work. There's also Comrade Gabriel Maimela, who's saying that they're happy to hear the goal and objectives of the establishment of the ANC. And they like that Comrade Makoma is raising the fact that women should not be behind men regarding treating domestic workers. That is also a good point that we need to talk about. And this is in the context of saying that just because a person is considered oppressed doesn't mean that they're also not going to subjugate other people that they perceive to be below them. You know, there's often is this triangle where at the top it's a white man, then it's a white woman, then it's a black man, then it's a black woman. There's also other people below the black woman. The standard of oppression or subjugation in society is not a black woman. There's a whole lot of other people that are subjugated on the basis of their identity. So thank you, Comrade Gabriel, for also raising that point that Comrade Makoma raised. Dr. Kiren Mutwaha says that there's too much fragmentation of programs that need to implement laws and policies. Implementation, monitoring, and evaluation remains a challenge. I absolutely agree, Comrade Kiren, because there often is this belief that just because a platform is available for a particular thing, then therefore that platform is then going to be effective. You know, I like saying that allowing people access without giving them the necessary support doesn't necessarily translate to you actually having allowed them access in that particular space. And an example that I can make is with public participation, where there will be, whether it's an IDP or it's a consultation process for a bill that needs to be passed in Parliament and all sorts of things. But if that space is not accessible by the people that actually need to participate in that, then our democracy in terms of its quality, we are failing, if I can say that, at a certain to a certain extent, because what's the point, for instance, in having discussion documents be as thick as this box, and then you want people to engage qualitatively and productively and efficiently and all those things in that discussion when you've not made the material, for instance, that they need to be engaged with, that they need to engage on to be accessible, whether we're using issues of the medium that you're using for that consultation process, or it's the language as well that you're using for the consultation process. I'm going to stop now reading the comments because there's quite a lot of them. I want to take hands. I'm going to start with Comrade Simo, and then Comrade Janet Sherry, and then Comrade Mahlatsi, and then Comrade Tanya, and then Comrade Umrabulo. So comrades, may I ask that you just keep your questions, comments, or remarks to maybe 2 minutes, so that we're able to have the panelists be able to respond, because we are left with just less than 20 minutes before we conclude for the day. Thank you, comrades. Comrade Simo, you can come in. Simo Zulu. Okay, I'm going to go to Comrade Janet while we wait for Comrade Simo to unmute themselves. Comrade Janet, you can come in. Comrade Janet Sherry. Okay, I'm also going to move to Comrade Mahlatsi Mokhale, please come in. Or are comrades unable to unmute themselves? Is that probably why?
Yes, Comrade Sarah, they need to be unmuted.
Ah, okay. Okay. I was not aware that they're not able to. Okay, I'll go back to Comrade Simo. Comrade Simo, I've just prompted you to unmute yourself so that
Thank
you
you
can
very much. Thank you very much, comrade.
Apologies for that. I was not aware that you had to be prompted to unmute.
Okay, am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, without any further waste of time on my side, thank you very much, comrades, for the excellent presentations, which are very thought-provoking. We could go on and on, but we don't obviously have time. The first point that I would like to make is the point that we know, all of us, that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, and this is inclusive of issues related to race, color, gender, class, and social origin, and the inclusivity injunction in our politics and in the politics of the ANC is fundamentally important as we pursue the issue of making sure that South Africa indeed does belong to all. And this is a fundamental point that I think cuts across all the presentations that comrades were making. On the issue of upward mobility of women, I think it's also important to underscore the point that there is no doubt. Again, there is no doubt in women's abilities, capabilities, in leadership, and in leading us in society as a whole, not just in the ANC. But how do we then address the fundamental problem in our political culture and the political culture of South Africa generally, and in the culture of the ANC that puts men above women? That is the core for me. And then lastly, I think there's a lot that has been said about our ability to come up with policies and lofty goals and ideas and objectives. But I think what is also lacking is the thoroughgoing and conscious process of ensuring that we are more evidence-based now in our approach, in our analysis, and in our research, in our monitoring and evaluation of outputs, outcomes, and impacts of all of these policies that we have developed as the governing party and as government, and our ability to make an assessment of how have these had an impact or are having an impact on women more broadly, and women specifically, so that indeed we do achieve an inclusive society. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Comrade Simo. Comrade Janet, I'm about to prompt you to unmute so that you come in.
Thank you, comrades, and good afternoon. I'm Janet Cherry from Ward 1 in Nelson Mandela Bay, and I'm working in the higher education space at Nelson Mandela University. And I really appreciated the inputs, especially from Comrade Patsy, which I thought was really, really balanced and fair and helpful. But I wanted to respond to Makoma, who I think made a really, really important point about regressing in the ANC and women's leadership and women's representation. And I've served recently with the local government elections on a interviewing and vetting panel for people to be councillors. And it was really disturbing because of the imperative to put women into every second position on the list, but not having women who had the experience and the capacity to fill those positions. And it was the most disturbing process to be part of. And it really made me question whether that is, having this kind of quota is really the way forward. I mean, I really think the ANC needs to question this issue of quotas and representation in terms of our own structures and in terms of public representatives. I don't think it's serving the interests of the movement at this point, because of the crisis that the ANC is in and that the country is in. I just think we have to think beyond that kind of mechanistic method of selection, because we're ending up with the wrong people in those leadership positions, which of course doesn't mean that women are not, that we don't have capable women leaders. I mean, there are plenty, as we can see on this platform, but for some reason the processes are not conducive to selecting those women as leadership. And I'll just share with you something interesting about, this thing about the top 6, and there must be 2 out of 6 must be female and so on. I was, a long time ago, I was the National General Secretary of NUSAS, the student organization. And women in NUSAS didn't have any kind of separate organization, but we had a strong feminist lobby. And the year I was General Secretary, it was the first time ever, I think 4 out of the 5 national executive were women. And basically we just had to work through those male structures, to convince them that we were actually the people who were suitable for those positions. Anyway, I don't have an easy answer for it, but I'm sort of challenging or appealing that process is reconsidered in some way. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade Janet. Comrade Mahlatsi, I'm also going to prompt you now to unmute so that you unmute and then come in.
Thank you, leadership. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm Mahlatsi Mogale. I'm the Deputy Provincial Chairperson of the YCL in Limpopo. One will ask himself about the historical oppression of women or the current oppression. But the answer might be that it was not always like this. The answer is no. Though women has been oppressed and exploited for centuries, this sexist heritage was not always the case. During the majority of human history, women were not oppressed. In fact, in the old communal society, women were equal to men. In some Eastern matriarchal society existed. It is important to note that in this society, men were not always oppressed by women, but held a certain social and cultural importance to women and family and community that was based on exploitation or oppression of men. While the division of labor and social roles that men and women fulfilled was different, there was no system of inferiority or superiority based on division of labor, not until the emergence of private property. Therefore, the class society did oppress the women emergence. Since then, women has been oppressed in all forms of class society, including slavery, feudalism, and capitalism. It is not easy to conclude that women oppression in his historical based on class oppression and current perpetuated by class society. Marxists argue that the absence of women oppression in pre-property ownership society proved that women oppression is based on the system of private property and not naturally outgrow the dominance of men. Consequently, abolition of private property will lay a basic for complete of liberation of women. That was my comment. So when I was listening to the presentation by the later speaker, it seems like the women are trying to see themselves as separate from men. and which is something that is the system always confuse people to see men separate from women. The women must not start to think as if their men are separate from them. There must be a certain progressive change around women's thinking that conscientize women that they are also part of the progressive forces. And when they go there, they must go there not as women, they must go there as progressive people in the people's liberation. I would like to pause that. Thank you, leadership.
Thank you, Comrade Mahlatsi. Comrade Tanya, I'm about to prompt you as well to unmute, and then you can come in.
Thank you, comrades, and good afternoon to everybody. I firstly just want to say I'm going into load shedding shortly. I hope I've got a few comments more than questions. But I want to thank the people that presented today. Thank you so much for the presentations. Mine is just to start with saying that I'm glad that the ANC has now seen that we need change in the ANC and start looking at the fourth industrial revolution type of thing and not just be at where we come from. So there is changes that is happening. The ANC, I also just want to mention that our policies are very good, but implementation has always been our biggest problem. And for a long time, we are struggling with that. I want to agree, and I want to mention this, that in our communities, we find it very difficult to get into the ANC because there is still a lot of gatekeeping. So when it comes to LGBTQIA+, we have problems. When it comes to gender, there is issues. So we try and get ourselves together through NGOs, but the minute we want to join or when we're in the ANC, there is still very much of gatekeeping. So we really need to start looking at that because they are saying that we don't have the numbers. So in the ANC, it's still very much a number game, which keeps us out. And as much as when it comes to election time, they need the 2% that they say is needed, and then we can be part of this ANC. I am a leader in the ANC, and it is a problem still for others. It can't be that Tanya is the only REC member in Johannesburg. So those are things that we must really start looking at. I want to commend Gauteng because we have a LGBTIAQ desk in the Premier's office. We have it in, and we are looking at doing it, putting motions in our municipality to get that desk going as well. So those are things that we are trying to change in our area where we are at. I also just want to mention that the question of youth is never a problem. We are always saying that we need to make sure that we get them for our future leadership. But my question is always been, what happens to our mothers that are single women, that is unemployed from 36 going upwards? That is the mothers that must put bread on the table. And we are not making sure that those areas, we always talk about 18 to 35, which is not a problem, but we need to ask, how do we better the lives if we talk about social transformation of these type of things? We also spoke about taking women to be mayors and putting them in leadership. And
yes, you keep on breaking. I don't know if you've already been load shared. I also would just like to stop you here because I'm looking.
Okay. All right. Let me then pause. Thank you. Thank you.
Time we are scheduled to finish at 2 p.m. Comrade Tanya, thank you, Comrade Tanya. Comrade, I'm happy to be the last one, which is because we are out of time. And then I would just like to ask you again to just grant us grace so that we continue with this dialogue post 2 p.m. We're supposed to end at 2, but can you please just extend it to 2:15 so that we then give our panelists a few minutes to give their closing remarks. Thank you. Comrade Lonwabo, I'm going to prompt you now to unmute, and then you can come in for 2 minutes, please.
Greetings to the house at large. I hope you're good, hope you're great. I'm an LGBTI activist and a concerned citizen in South Africa. I love this space and thank you for creating such a conversation. I have 2 points. I hope I won't be too long. As much as we want inclusivity about GBV, why don't we go and find out in their shelters and orphanages or welfare centers, how are these women? Because we have people who stand in the name of protecting women and children in these spaces. Do we know how is the treatment there? There is a big elephant that is not raised in those places.
I think you have a connectivity problem.
You can't hear me. Hello? Greetings. Am I audible now?
Not hearing.
My God. Oh my word. All right. Mr. Closes, Dr. Closes, can you hear me?
Okay, you can come in
Can
because
you
you
hear me,
break once in
comrades?
a while.
Am I audible
Yes,
now?
we can hear you now. I'm just saying that you break once in a while.
Oh,
Yes.
it's raining. Please forgive me. I'm trying my best to be as audible. But I was just saying, as much as we have GBV activists and people who are responsible for owning shelters and whatsoever, who's there to do background check in the institutions where these people reside? Because there are people who are old enough to tell how's the treatment there. In order for us to understand how is this GBV combated, we need to also look at the big elephants in those spaces. Number 2, as an LGBTI representing person who's proudly lesbian, we often hear that there's inclusion of LGBTI people, but as someone who's on the ground,
Comrade
doesn't have an
Lonwabo, I'm
office
going
space.
to now ask Comrade Luwaca as to come in. Comrade Luwaca, I'm prompting you to unmute. Please come in.
What happened?
Thanks, comrades. I will not be long. I just have a brief question. In fact, I'm trying, as I'm sitting here, trying to understand how is it possible that in all conferences of the ANC, largely even in provincial conferences, there's more women representation when the delegates. But the picture, when it comes out as male dominated. How is that possible? What is it that we need to disrupt? Could it be that we need to disrupt a culture? Is it is also one of our major tasks beyond? Yes, I get representativity, but to take the struggle further in terms of the institutional culture within the ANC that will also make the ANC interrogate its own cosmologies, epistemologies, because, you know, we can get 50-50%, but the culture, the heteronormative culture will then remain. Really, how are we speaking into the institutional culture within the ANC? And that will also speak into the language so that we can even be able to fix the language, so that we don't hear languages such as the Reclam Protector, all of that. We get to a point where we have a discussion around the culture within the ANC that is heteronormative. So I don't know, but I just have one question: that how is that possible? Perhaps could we not use ways in terms of the knowledge that we are using, in terms of the gender struggle, you know, in terms of the agenda,
Can you please
agenda,
wrap up? Please.
So thank you.
Thank you. Comrade Tula, I'm prompting you to unmute so that you come in. Comrade Tula, I've prompted you to unmute.
Thank you very much. I'm tempted to, reduce my comment because the last speaker has actually spoken to what I wanted to raise, to say the elephant is in the house, but who is that elephant? It is us because we are in the majority. And I think Comrade Makoma touched it to say one other thing that women need to begin to look at is the jealousy, the pull-down syndrome. Sometimes we want to debate issues of pull-down syndrome to say there is no pull-down syndrome, we are being manipulated. But honestly speaking, it is worrisome. We need to go deep and search what is actually happening to us. It can't be that we go in numbers too big in conferences, and then when we get there, we come back empty-handed. But the main thing also is, from where I'm seated, we're having a plethora of legislation, policies, but it looks as if the battlefield is not properly leveled such that women are able to play a role in terms of contesting this power that is there. Comrade Makoma said when they were doing the interviews, powerful men, and I underline that, powerful men were contesting with ordinary women. So that in itself tells that there is a perception that women are not necessarily empowered to get into the battlefield and contest, such that occupying such positions of mayor, MECs, ministers, presidency, it's something that has to raise ears to say, Batla khona na basadi ba. And I want to put it clear here to say, we are sufficiently empowered. For as long as we are not collaborating, connecting, and contracting, we are not going anywhere. I think the Department of Women Ministry has already conceptualized this thing of collaboration, connecting, and contracting. If we can go along those lines, we will go back to where we were having book coalition, book progressive women's movement, and then work together. And when we are working together, we'll be able to identify a lot of women who's got capacity, continue to empower them such that they occupy those positions and dance nicely in the boardroom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Tulamsindo. Comrade Tumelo, please come in. I'm also prompting you now to unmute.
Thank you very much, Chairperson of the session. The last two speakers, they spoke what was on my mind, but I would say that the captured theory of representation and inclusivity with regard to the documents of the organization is that you should be aware that women are in the majority, and if they are in majority, and they play a very important role in the modern society. If you check the modern society, women lead the houses. In fact, one of the reasons that I'm saying this is that most of the households are no longer having fathers. So women play a very important role in molding the young people into society. So I think there should be a fair representation bearing that in mind. And in youth, we live in a young community. And
may I ask that you
yes, my last thing is that we live in young community, young society. So We should bear in mind that if we live in young society, there should be a representation in every sphere of government to consider young people's representation. I don't want to be long, and I want to end there. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Comrade Dumelo. Comrade Silo, before I go to Comrade Silo, Comrade Steve is being out of order. Comrade Steve is raising their hand after I've said I'm noting all the hands for today because we're out of time. Comrade Steve, if I still have a minute, then I will allow you to speak. If not, unfortunately, my friend, we'll speak in another dialogue. Comrade Silo, please come in. I'm prompting you to unmute, 2 minutes max.
Thank you, Comrade Sarah. Just going back to the issue of the strategic goal of attaining our national democratic society, speaking specifically to the issue of the LGBTQI plus community, why do we not propose to conference that we add inclusivity? Because if you read, for example, Section 9 of the Constitution, which is the Equality Clause, it is much more broader than what you have, for example, in the Freedom Charter, with the understanding that society has evolved. So that it is not simply implied. Yes, we're talking of a united, non-racial, non-sexist society, but to specifically speak to the inclusion of that specific community. One comrade said we constitute 2%, but South Africa, after all, belongs to all who live in it. Very lastly, earlier on, we had our own branch workshop, and predominantly, of course, there were women. And one does try to ensure that women feel comfortable. I do think we need to talk among ourselves as men comrades, particularly in terms of the mental models, the mindsets, to encourage women to be bold enough to occupy positions of leadership and other areas of responsibility. And at one point I shared, I asked them to listen in when Comrade Asanda was talking. And they were saying, you know, I want to finish my matric and this and that. And we should, in conclusion, use the district development model. One comrade spoke about being evidence-based. We often assume that women will simply be, you know, catapulted into higher positions and so forth, but we forget that the free market system is not tolerant of lack of skills and those kinds of things. We can't simply expect women to be in social protection programs or EPWP. We have to ensure that they are graduated into the high echelons of society. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Silo. Last hand for this afternoon's dialogue. Comrade Joseph, please come in. I'm also prompting you now to unmute. Actually, Comrade Joseph is not connected to sound, so they won't be able to speak. Comrade Steve, you can come in. Comrade Steve? Okay, it seems that we are not going to be taking any more hands. Okay, oh, Comrade Steve says I must unmute them. Sorry, let me just quickly search for their name because I thought they'd pop up as close as possible. Okay, I've just prompted unmuting you, Comrade Steve.
No, thank you so much, Comrade. I listened carefully and I did not want to disrupt, but I thought it's necessary just to say one thing, and I really appreciate your consideration, and I want to thank your panelists for this. Look, Chair, I want to say that not all is lost. I think there are great lessons we need to take in the history of prejudice that we have and that we come from as a country because of colonization, and we need to understand that there has been really already existing and exacerbating intra-community tension and power dynamics that we have to speak about, whether on the basis of sex, whether on the basis of sexual orientation, and even gender identity for that matter. So I think the opportunity lies with how we actually embed our understanding in shifting the power dynamics around the social technical context with, the design of our constitution as an organization, but also the implementation of our constitution. Because while we have already said that ANC is not non-sexist and non-racial organization, but in terms of implementation, I think there's quite a number of elements of fear, the number of elements of, not even challenging and dismantling the power dynamics and being intentional in our effort. So I think it's time. And if we're going to rebuild, renew, and really ensure that there's that collective element, we need to prove within the Constitution that these are the intention of shifting the power dynamics. But we also need to then show in operationalizing those resolutions, this is how we move them forward. It must be seen, it must be intentional, and it must also be felt by everybody. But I think we all is not lost. We are in the right pathway. We just need to fix and repair those injustices of the past. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade Steve. I'm going to start with Comrade Asanda to give her closing remarks, and then it's going to be Comrade Makoma. Comrade Asanda, you can come in. Comrade Mbele, I'm not going to note you because I had indicated that we're out of time, so we're no longer noting any more hands. Apologies for that. Comrade Asanda, please come in with your closing remarks. Please keep it to 5 minutes max.
Sure. No, thank you very much, Comrade Sarah. And in fact, I'll be much shorter than that. Yeah, I think, really one must appreciate once again for such, thought-provoking inputs. And, I think I was reading on the chats and just trying to collate all of the comments. I think at one, I would agree with the Comrade Nomfanelo Goda. We definitely do need a second session where, we'll be able just to allow participants more time to, thoroughly engage on these inputs. I think, ours was just to perhaps problematize the topics or the discussion and leave it to the comrades to further unpack and build on that. So yeah, I think, if the facilitators would grant us that opportunity, then I think it would greatly assist. So I'll just briefly then also touch on your inputs, Comrade Sarah, when you were asking around, apologies, comrades, I've got
this is what inclusivity is about. Don't worry. The conversation.
Yeah, representation matters, right? So his views must also be represented
as well.
Yes, definitely. But yeah, just to quickly respond, you had asked around, how do we have get to a point or consolidate, youth voices that are organized outside of ANC structures. And I think the answer linked to this it lies in our discussions on the renewal task that we are currently undergoing as the ANC. So part of our discussions, and I think, the December conference would really be important insofar as ensuring that if we are saying that as an ANC or as a movement, we are able to effectively mobilize and organize our motive forces, then we need to adequately respond to what then becomes our strategy in dealing with, organized youth, organized women, our working class, middle strata, your professionals, your intelligentsia, your patriotic bourgeoisie and the likes. And we also need to get to an appreciation that we won't have a silver bullet to everything. So what are the strategies that might be relevant for a youth? But even within the youth cohort, it's quite segmented, so we've got youth. When we say youth, young people are not homogeneous. How do we constructively have strategies that deal with youth that are from your LGBTQIA plus community, youth that are living with disabilities, youth that are residing in your rural and your peri-urban societies and the likes? I think that's when we'd effectively begin to respond, and we'll get to a point where we then become the true leaders of society, and not allow, but not allow for such a disintegration that we've seen insofar as youth movements are concerned. And then also the comments that Comrade Simo asked, or made rather, on the need to have a more evidence-based on our outputs, outcomes, impacts of policies. I definitely do agree. And I think we do need to, even at the level of our entire policy cycle as the ANC, because we've got an effective M&E machinery in government, but, you know, can we confidently say that even at the level of the organization, we have something similar, so that we get to a point where we have a sense of accountability and tracking of policy. Now, I know we've, you know, to a large extent, one can argue that we've got your NGCs for that, and your midterm policy reviews, and you've got different parts of different organs of the state. For instance, at a parliamentary level, your ANC caucus has quite an effective M&E, but how do we have that cascading down so that we're able to, you know, have all our structures be able to effectively monitor such policies? And then, yeah, I think everything else would have just been comments, and yeah, I think without necessarily repeating and diluting some of those comments, I think mine is just to appreciate the comments that have been made and the inputs from today's discussions. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade Asanda. Comrade Makoma, your last words.
Thank you very much, comrades. And I want to appreciate the comrades that have made inputs on the chat. It's true that we didn't have enough time, and even our presentation was just to scratch the surface, but we wanted to create more questions than answers. That was the intention, that we must start asking more questions. But I think what I wanted to say is we must remind every one of us that, comrades, patriarchy was more embedded on economic, social, religious, cultural, family, and other relations in all the communities. If you go back, some of those practices in the community still exist, where there are still people who think when there is a dispute between a male and a female, when you go to a traditional court, the woman still can't get a favorable ruling. It's just because today we didn't have time, but we still have those kind of practices that still happen. So in that kind of society, having those people as members of the ANC going to a branch general meeting, how do we expect them to believe when they don't believe in women generally, irrespective of whatsoever? So I'm just saying that debate must go back to our own branches, and that is where the real debate must happen, because if things that don't change at branch level, no matter how hard we want to see a female president, will remain a pipe dream at some level. I'm just giving that as a worst case scenario. But another matter which I want to raise, which is a difficult, is the fact that why do we say things went wrong? The wrongs that happens in the ANC, that's why the ANC is now calling for all of us for renewal. Because women, as I'm saying, as a factor, or as one of the class that the ANC is supposed to ensure that it's previously disadvantaged, it must be given an opportunity like the young people and LGBTQI. When you look at poverty, still affect women. Unemployment, the triple challenges are still affect women than any other place. And our view is, as I already said, that when the gender machinery towards the coordination of all women empowerment has collapsed, it's a problem that I said, that is regression, that I said since 1994, when we thought we were going up, at some point, though if those structures, your gender machinery has regressed, then it's a problem that we need to ensure that we start looking at. And again, the issue of gender mainstreaming, which is no longer an issue that is being attended to, is no longer a priority. So we are saying those are the things that we must start looking at. How do we make sure that that department that is responsible in government can be able to do what is expected to do? But the ANC, if it doesn't have...
losing you, Comrade Makoma.
Hello? Okay, the last point that I want to say, Comrade Sarah, is that I want to refer to everyone to the words of Meshalot Matleke. That always remind us what is the task we're supposed to do. That this work is not for yourself. Keep that spirit of self. Do not live above your people, but live with them. If you can rise, bring someone with you. Do away with fearful jealousy.
Yes, you can hear you.
Spirit. I was saying let's go back and remind ourselves if we deal with issues of inclusivity, and all the time remind ourselves on the words of Mam Charlotte Maxeke that says, this work is for all of us. Let's work together to ensure that we achieve the goals of the African National Congress towards the National Democratic Revolution. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Thank you, comrade. Sorry, I just had to reject a call because I'm using my phone now as a hotspot because my Wi-Fi is giving me issues. Thank you, Comrade Makoma. And thank you once again to all of you comrades that have given us more than 2 hours of your time today to come form part of this dialogue. We really, really appreciate it. And as Comrade Nomfanele has said, and I thank you that also Comrade Asanda raised this as well, that it would be great that we have a much more extensive discussion about this, because what I like saying is that minority people or minority groups aren't necessarily homogeneous, in as much as all of them are being subjugated in the same system, but the issues that they encounter, issues that they have, that they experience on a daily and all sorts of things, they differ. So it would be best that we actually stop, as the ANC as well, and as a society, we stop when we want to talk about minority issues, we want to clump them together, you know, issues of race, issues of sex, issues of gender, issues of class, and all those kinds of things. So I would like to, I'm being out of order in doing this, but I would just want to implore my colleagues at the OR Tambo School that in the next dialogues that we have, so that we have enough room to just unpack or elaborate further on a whole lot of issues, we maybe try not to have the topics have a lot of, how can I put this? Not have the topics that we want to discuss have a lot of points in them or areas or themes that then make time not enough for all of us to unpack on these issues that have been raised. And the closing remarks that I want to give as facilitator, outside of thanking everyone for your time and my colleagues at the OR Tambo School as well for facilitating tonight's dialogue, is that as we head to the 55th conference of the ANC comrades in December, we must know that membership or leadership of the ANC is leadership of everyone, regardless of the fact that it happens that we have women who are in majority in terms of delegation. It is not the responsibility of women alone to vote for women leadership. Each and every member of the ANC has a responsibility to vote for women leadership. Each and every member of the ANC has a responsibility to vote for LGBTQIA+ members in the leadership of the ANC, because everyone that is part of that conference is part of that conference as a member of the ANC. Therefore, everyone has the obligation of voting for those people, regardless of their gender and regardless of their sex, because this conversation actually doesn't extend to people that are non-Black or people that we say are non-African, because when we want to speak on the issue of the national question or addressing the national question, we vote for those comrades, regardless of the fact that the majority of the delegation is Black people. In the same way that majority of the delegation might be women, which actually is a result of a controlled process, because if that process was not controlled, we would most likely have a delegation full of men only, because there's this belief that only men can take political decisions. So once again, comrades, each and every member of the ANC has responsibility to vote for leadership of the ANC. And if we're saying that leadership of the ANC has to be women only, even the men at conference have the responsibility to vote for the women leaders of the ANC, in the same way that we as women vote for men in the ANC. Thank you once again, comrades. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to having you in the next dialogue. Have a good day once again. Thank you.
On this occasion, the world is with us in support, guaranteeing that we shall win.
South Africa will be transferred to a country of all South Africans, of all races and creeds. That that is innocent.